Hello, listeners from Everything Music with Gary Dranow. Today we have a very interesting guest on, David Bash, who is the founder and CEO of Pop Overthrow Music Festival, which has been going on for what, David, about 25 years?
This will be our 26th year in Los Angeles coming up in August.
26th year.
Yep.
Um, uh, what David has managed to do is have a festival that has occurred in a lot of venues all over the world, but really started in Los Angeles, my hometown. Uh, I noticed that one of his earlier venues, and he may still be going there, is the Troubadour, where uh, in the early 70s I went to see my music. But let's run down some of the venues that,
Let me point out, unfortunately, we haven't been in the Troubadour for over 20 years. I mean, back in the day, you could get a venue like that and for for a manageable rental fee. And times have changed. So we're in much smaller venues now, except for the Calvin
now
Club.
that you've brought it up, let's jump into right how times have changed because I was just watching an interview with you with a couple of UK guys from I think 2016, and uh,
Oh, okay.
th things have really changed coming into 2020 25. So if you could give me a little bit of an overview of how you see the music industry today, as opposed to when you got your start in the late 1990s, that would be great.
Well, in the late 1990s, it was only the beginnings of the death knell of the industry. It was still, it was still happening, and bands were still being signed. And when I say bands, I mean bands who were doing melodic rock and roll music. Um, the internet was still in its relative infancy, and it hadn't had a profound effect yet on how the music business was being run. So there was still some hope. There were still bands who were, you know, um, hoping and maybe even expecting to be signed because others were. So in the late 1990s, when I started International Pop Overthrow, I was able to get a lot of up and coming bands, a lot of bands who ultimately would be signed, um,
Like Maroon 5, for
like Maroon
example.
5,
Yeah.
although they were Kara's Flowers at the
Yep.
time I had them. But their third appearance in 2000, they were already doing Maroon 5 songs. They were still under the old name, but they had the fifth member. And yeah, we were all kind of looking at each other like, what are they doing? Because it was so different from Kara's Flowers. But we came to find out that they were just sanding and varnishing the beginnings of Maroon 5. Um, but yeah, so back then there were still in industry, but not. It didn't take too long before the internet started happening, and there was Napster, of course, and the major labels and record stores pretty much they didn't see the writing on the wall or they didn't want to. But they didn't act accordingly. They didn't take advantage of this new way of life known as the internet, and they kind of they wanted to say that they saw it as a fad, and it wasn't going to have any major impact, and they were wrong. And before you know it, a lot of the major labels either shut down completely or got gobbled up by big corporations like Sony. And again, Napster had a profound effect. People were getting music free, and you know, no doubt that the labels could have done something like that in a different form, maybe if they had been a bit more prescient, but they didn't. And subsequently, yeah, I mean, things just started to shut down or to be just reconstructed.
Do you see Napster as kind of the predecessor of Spotify?
In a way. I mean, it was the first platform where you could get music online. Um, it was so yeah. I mean, I would say that probably without Napster, there may not be a Spotify. I mean, someone would have probably come up with something similar because once people saw the advantages of the internet and the pliability of it, I think other people would have done something like Napster. Maybe they would have charged money, maybe not, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I see Napster as yeah being the beginning of a lot of what we now know as streaming services.
Okay. International Pop Overthrow. Interesting name. And I'm really curious, and this has something to do with the band Material Issues. I just listened to while I was getting ready for you, Laura's My Love, or from Material Issue. Uh, Help me with the song.
Valerie Loves Me?
Valerie Loves Me, yeah.
Yeah,
Um, uh, they really have that 60s UK sound to them. And
yes,
the lead guy, and I believe that's them in the photo behind me.
it is.
And that is Jim Ellison in fronting the band.
Yes.
Um, and tell me why they had such a big impact on you. And let's get a little bit into Jim Ellison.
I didn't know Jim Ellison. I I had seen them play in right at the beginning of 1991 in Los Angeles, and I was very very impressed, especially with Jim. He just had that front man attitude thing going on, and I'd heard Valerie Loves Me on the radio. It was being played quite a bit out here in Los Angeles. Um, and they released three more albums, one of which was um, after the band had broken up. But Jim unfortunately took his own life at the end of I don't remember the exact day. I should, but it was in 1996. And so when I did decide to start this music festival, I wanted to pay tribute to him and the band by naming it International Pop Overthrow, which as you see behind you, that's their debut album. That was the name of their debut album.
Ah, okay. I was trying to research that, and I couldn't quite find out the connection. So thank you for bringing that up.
My pleasure. That was part of it. The other reason I named it that was I wanted to convey that what we were trying to do with the festival was galvanize a worldwide pop festival and a worldwide pop music scene and bring it under one roof, which at the time was Los Angeles. And we wanted to overthrow what was being played on the radio at that time because you were getting a lot of bands like Korn and Limp Bizkit and nothing against them personally, but they weren't melodic. I mean,
Right.
melody was just not part of what they did, and I was
They
missing
were
that.
they were missing the hook.
They were missing they were missing the hook. They were missing well, I mean, some people might say some of their songs had lyrics that stuck in your head, but there was no melody going on.
Right.
And that was really important to me, melody in songs. So I was missing it, and I knew that there was a very strong pop scene around the world that was still doing this kind of music. I mean, it wasn't they most of those bands weren't being signed. You weren't hearing it on the radio, except in some maybe nascent underground internet stations, or just FM stations run out of somebody's home. But I had been writing reviews for several years at that point for pop music fanzines, and I knew several bands from around the world. And who are doing, pop music, power pop, like Material Issue. And I knew that a scene could be created if we could just get them all together.
Which you managed to do.
Yeah.
Let's go through. some of the venues that you have either been at or currently going at. And I think the headliner is the Cavern Club, Liverpool,
Absolutely.
UK. Are you still there?
We are still there. And in fact, we did our 20th year last year at the Cavern, and they awarded me with a brick on their Wall of Fame. And
Fantastic.
it really is fantastic, in part because, well, it's a Cavern Club, the most famous club in the world, and also because non-musicians don't get bricks there, except for their DJs. So a Cavern Club DJ will get a brick, but otherwise, yeah, I mean, people who are associated with the club but aren't musicians, they don't get bricks, but they gave me one because, as they say, I've brought more than 2,000 bands to the Cavern Club over those 20 years. So
And
we
then
will be
bringing up,
back in May, actually, for our 21st.
okay, bringing up 2,000 bands, you consume an amazing amount of music. And I get this from your vinyl collection, which I think is 8,000 records or something like that.
No, not, it's mainly my CD collection, which is about 15,000. I probably now have about maybe 3,000 LP vinyl records, but that keeps increasing. I sold a lot of vinyl back in 1993 because I wanted to convert to CD. Um, and it didn't take too long before I regretted having sold some of them anyway. So over the years, I started rebuying um, some of the ones I sold. And and then, now that there's been these really great reissues being done on so many albums that I love. I've been buying a lot of those. And I've just sort of gotten into buying vinyl by current bands. Some of them aren't even doing CDs anymore. A lot of them are just doing vinyl. So,
So, since we're talking about vinyl, what do you see is the current situation for vinyl and going forward? Do you see it regaining popularity?
well, it already has in many circles, especially young kids who are in bands who are, like I said, they're doing their records exclusively on vinyl. Um, a lot of people in the indie rock scene and the pop scene. Um, a lot of people are buying records, eschewing CDs, because they really like the look of they're kind of like how we were when we were kids. They like the look of the record. They like the sound. They feel it's warmer, which indeed it is in many cases. Um, but what I've been hearing lately, I don't know how true this is. I don't know if this is just hype or rhetoric, but people are starting to feel like CDs are going to make a comeback. I don't know if it'll be tomorrow, but it could very well happen in the next few years.
Okay. Uh, so the Cavern Club, the Troubadour, which you said you haven't been to in 20 years, which was my stomping ground when I lived in LA. By the way, we're both Alley guys. I grew up in Woodland Hills, went to Taft High School, and you relocated from Poughkeepsie, New York to Reseda, I believe.
Well, I relocated from Poughkeepsie to New City, New York, which was a little bit closer to Manhattan, and then I relocated with my family more than 40 years ago to Orange County, and I lived in Orange County for about 12 years. Then moved to Bakersfield for a year
That's a move.
for a job, and then came back and have lived in the valley ever since. I've been in Reseda since 1919.
Wow.
19,
Okay.
2019. God, I'm not that
Uh,
old.
1919 puts you in there with Robert Johnson.
That's
Um,
right.
uh, okay, so the El Rey, are you still there?
No, we haven't been there also for about 25 years or so.
And is that because they're just harder to get booked at now, or
It's partially harder to get booked, and it's like anything else with live music. It's a lot harder to get people to come out. We're showcasing pop music, mainly power pop, but also a lot of different subgenres of pop. And as the years go by, our fans get older. They get older with the music in a sense, and they just don't have the energy to
To
go
get
out as
out.
much as they did.
Yeah.
It's very hard to get people to go out, and it's always been a challenge to get people to go out to see bands that they may not have heard of. But now part of the problem is with the glut of music that's been coming out over the years, it's so hard for people to focus on a few things. So it's very difficult to get people to come to the shows. And that's not just us, that's a lot of places. So now we use smaller venues, other than the cavern, of
When
course,
you
which is
say
fine with me.
smaller venues under 100 people,
It's, usually somewhere between 100 and 250.
okay. Um, uh, Continuing with the venues, Spaceland. I've heard of it. I know it's a Los Angeles venue. Are they still around?
I think they're still around. They might be under a different name. I don't know how much they're doing, but yeah, back in the early years of IPO, Spaceland was a very happening venue. It was a place where national acts would come and play. The hippest indie rock bands would play there. Um, and yeah, I felt
So
privileged to
kind
be
of
able to
like
do
the
shows there.
Roxy and Whiskey a Go Go and
Well, it didn't have the feel of the Strip. It was a little bit more indie rock than the Roxy and Whiskey a Go Go were a little bit more either straight ahead rock bands or young bands who were still trying to make it big. The Strip had a totally different feel than Silver Lake.
right, right.
So yeah, it
Uh,
wasn't. I wouldn't say they were the same, but yeah, Spaceland was one place where we did shows for many years.
Um, and I will go. I'll just remind my subscribers that uh, IPO, which is how we're going to be referring for the rest of the show, um, got its start in Los Angeles,
Yes.
and then over years, um, like I said, they're a staple at the Cavern Club. Is that every year, by the way?
Every year. Well, most of the cities in which we do the festival are every year. We try to maintain consistency. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way, but our aim is always to continue to do the shows in the cities where we are every year.
Are you still in Toronto at the Rivoli?
Oh, we haven't been at the Rivoli for a long time, but we are still in Toronto. We're at a place called the Painted Lady right now.
Painted Lady.
Yeah.
I just saw something with a woman with butterfly wings. Anyways, I digress. Um,
Okay.
the Khyber in Philadelphia.
Long time. We haven't. Well, we did come back to Philadelphia about 7 and 8 years ago. We were there a couple of years, but not the Khyber. Yeah, these are all venues. The ones you're mentioning are all venues we did, back in the heyday of the late 90s, early 2000s.
So I've got some catching up to do. So rather than me go through a list of venues that have either gone by the wayside or are next to impossible to get into, why don't you tell me the cities that IPO is visiting now and some of your flagship venues?
Absolutely. We've been in Chicago now. This will be our 22nd year, and in fact, that one starts on Friday. My wife and I are headed to Chicago tomorrow night. Um, and we've been at a place called Montrose Saloon for the past few years, which is a really nice club. It's owned by a musician, so he knows how to treat musicians who play there, and he's well respected, and it's a perfect fit for us.
Would
They
that
feel
have
like family.
anything to do with the Montrose that's in the Deep Purple song? Any
Maybe.
real?
I'm not sure, actually. I'd have to ask the owner about that.
Okay.
But
Uh,
well, no, you know what it must have to do with. It's on Montrose Avenue in Chicago. So
aha.
So it must
Okay.
be that. I mean, there may be a, there may have been a secondary reason, like I named International Pop Overthrow the way I did for two reasons. But so that's where we are in Chicago. Then we go to Liverpool at the Cavern Club and the Cavern Pub, which is right across the street. It's, it's part of the same family. We will then be in Stockholm at a club called Encore, which is actually that's a fairly big venue. I bet that place holds about 500. Um, and it'll be our second year there. And what's cool is the owner there really likes what we do, and I'm always grateful for that. He gets the vibe, and that's very important that whoever I deal with at a venue really gets what we're doing. Then we'll be back in LA for our 26th year. We'll be at Redwood Bar, which is a venue that we've been in for the past few years. Um, I don't deal with the owner there. I deal with the booking person, Eddie Lopez, and he's a great guy, another musician. Really, again, he gets what we're doing, and we've been successful enough there to continue to do it for the past 4 years. This will be our fourth year, I should say. We'll then be in San Diego at a nice little club called Black Cat Bar, and we like it there a lot. Then we go to Vancouver, um, and we really love Vancouver. It's one of our favorite cities just to be in. And when I say our, I mean my wife and I. And we've been at a club called Lana Lou's for the past few years, owned by a woman named Lana, and she too is a musician, and she really loves what we do. And musicians really like the venue a lot. Then we'll be in Boston at a club called the Square Root. Nice small place. And the owner of that club is very cool as well. Then we'll be in New York at the Parkside Lounge, which is another venue where I kind of feel like we're family. It's just suited. It's not very big, but it's very well suited for what we do, and the bands love it. And I deal more with the sound engineer there than the owner. Even though I book the shows through the owner, the sound engineer is the one who's actively in charge of everything that goes on there, and he's great. Kip Elbaum, put a shout out to him. And then our final stop will be Toronto at the Painted Lady.
Okay. Um, uh, let's jump a little bit, and we're going to be moving around during this interview, so I hope
Absolutely.
you're quick on your feet. Um, you received your BA in psychology from University of California, Irvine. Is that right?
Well, it was a bad BS, yeah, which some
Okay.
people might say it's a bunch of BS, but I, I got my B. I got my first undergraduate degree. That was a BA in journalism from New York University. That was in 1981. Um, then I moved when I moved out to California with my family. I went back to school and got my undergraduate degree at Irvine in psychology, and then went into the doctoral program in cognitive psychology and was in that for a while, but I really felt misplaced in that. I really wanted to teach more than anything else. I didn't want to spend my time doing research and the whole publish or perish thing. So I left with my master's and ended up teaching community college level psychology for seven
At
years.
Cerritos College, was it
Oh, Cuyamaca.
Cuyamaca?
Yeah, all kinds of different colleges. I was
Uh,
known as a
but
three-way flyer.
I'm a military guy, and I noticed that you taught at Camp Pendleton, the home of
I
the
did.
Marines.
I
Uh,
did.
do you have a military background?
I don't at all. Uh, Camp Pendleton was doing classes there in association with Palomar College, which was not too far. Let me turn that off. Pardon me.
Take your time, bud.
Um, it was associated with Palomar College, And I had been teaching at Palomar, and they said, "Do you want to teach Marines?" I said, "Sure, why not?" So they said, "Yeah, we've got some classes at Camp Pendleton as well." So yeah, I taught there for a couple of years. Yeah, the Marines. It was Marines and also base people, who were employed there. And yeah, I mean, it was very interesting. And the thing I'll never forget is during right before I think one of my classes one day, many of the Marines got the message that they were going to be shipped to the Gulf, and I could see the looks on their faces. They were, they were scared. Well, who
Yep.
wouldn't be? But they weren't. They were certainly ready to go. And I had one student who said, "Look, I don't want to shirk my responsibility. I want to finish the work." And I said, "Look, you've got more important things to worry about than that." And he really insisted for like 3 minutes until I said to him, you know, "Please don't worry about it. Just be successful there, come back, and if I'm still teaching, we'll have you back." And so we left it at that.
So in December of 1997 is when you decided to start the International Pop Overthrow Music Festival.
Yes.
And I think we may have mentioned this in the beginning, but there was a festival or of sorts called Poptovia. And
Utopia, yeah.
Poptopia, yeah. And that is what gave you the idea for IPO, right?
Yeah, well, Poptopia was a very successful festival that was happening in the mid 90s. And I wanted to be a part of it, but it wasn't mine. But one thing I did know was that I knew bands from all over the world more than the organizer of Poptopia did. So I contacted him one day and said, "Is it okay if I send some bands your way? I mean, a lot of bands from all over want to play Poptopia." He said, "Yeah, go ahead." And I did. Um, and he booked, as many of them as he could, but he really didn't have a lot of room for bands from outside of LA. So a lot of them got turned down only on that basis. Like they were good enough, but he had no room. So they would come back to me and say, we didn't get in. We really want to play in LA. And that's kind of what gave me the impetus. So one day I was in the restaurant Carl's Jr. with an attorney friend of mine named Ben McLean. He's a music attorney. And he knew all about Poptopia also. And we were talking, and I said, "You know what? I'd like to do something like Poptopia, but with more of a worldwide uh, pop scene thing happening." And he said, "You should." And, I'd seen what the organizer was doing, and I had no experience whatsoever in running a festival. But he was a musician. He wasn't a pro per se, and he did it. So I thought, I know enough bands, both locally and elsewhere. Let me give it a go. So yeah, so that's how it started. And fortunately, I was able to book the festival in a
So,
lot of the
so
venues
your
that
very first
Poptopia was
show
using.
was where?
Very first show was at a really cool club called Jack's Sugar Shack. I wish it was still around because everybody loved it. It was on Hollywood and Vine.
Huh?
And it was a great little room. Um, yeah, everybody there was cool. But what ended up happening a couple of years later is a corporation bought out that whole block, and they made the owner an offer he couldn't refuse. I don't mean a Godfather-like offer. I mean lucrative offer that he'd be just a fool to have turned down. So he took it, and Jack's closed. And I said, "Well, why don't you just move it somewhere else?" He said, "It's time for me to get out of the business anyway." Because I have to tell you, and I'm sure you realize this, but a lot of other people may not. Running a venue is really, really hard. And you've got a lot of people to deal with. It's not just booking bands and hiring bartenders and security, but you've got liquor people to deal with. You have to be very concerned about, well, losing your liquor license if you're either over capacity or you somehow people under 21 get in and they're caught drinking. Your license first they may just suspend it for a bit, and then but if you get caught again, they'll probably close you down. It's a very tough racket, and I would never, one. I remember one time I was thinking I would do it, and I remember the manager of Jack's Sugar Shack, the club we mentioned. I told him, he said, "You're crazy," and then he kind of enlightened me a bit as
He
to
gave you some
pitfalls.
cautionary tales.
Very many cautionary tales, and I immediately kiboshed that idea, and I'm glad I did because I'm much happier doing what I'm doing. But yeah, it's tough to run venues, and now it's even tougher because one of the things that's happening, because as I mentioned, people aren't going out as much as they used to. Now, any venue that wants to do original live music has to compete with other venues who have cover bands, tribute bands, and
DJs.
DJs,
Yeah.
and it's very, very difficult. Um, So a lot of the venues who are wanting to do original music, even they're converting, at least in part, to do having DJs or cover bands, tribute bands. I've had some of the clubs we have to end our shows earlier than I'd like because at 11 p.m. they're bringing in a DJ, and you can see why they're doing it because people just line up to get into. Most people want to hear songs that they already know because they know they can dance to them, and if and it feels familiar, it feels comfortable. It and that these days, takes preferential treatment over seeing live bands, especially those that they don't know. I mean, it was always like that, but back then you could still draw enough. Back in the day, you could still draw enough people having a venue with live original music to make ends meet. Now it's very difficult. It's a big challenge. But you got to just keep on keeping on.
Yeah. Tell me about it. I'm 71 and I've been a musician since I heard Crossroads on my mom's car radio
Oh, wow.
in 68. So I got my first Stratocaster right then and there.
You
And
love Clapton.
I early Clapton I love, yeah.
Yeah.
But let's not talk about me. How much music do you consume in a month, in a year?
That's so difficult. I still get a lot of bands send me their music because they want to play the festival or also because of my podcast. It used to be much more because I wrote reviews. I'm really not writing much anymore. I'm concentrating on the podcast more.
That's Material Issue Podcast, right?
Material issues, actually. Yeah,
Issues. Okay.
yes, I mean that was a play off of the name Material Issue, but we added the S because we were talking about a lot of very important music issues on our shows. Not just mu music, but other things in life, but mainly music. Anyway, I still get sent a lot. I still purchase a lot of music, both current bands and reissues. And so yeah, I usually get it over more than 200 current band CDs or vinyl a year, and maybe somewhere close to that in reissues. I mostly purchase the reissues, but I'm a collector. If you look behind me, you'll see a lot of my box sets
Huh? Um,
behind
uh,
behind me, right over there.
I see the Beatles right over your
Yeah,
left shoulder.
that's the
Um,
Beatles mono box. Yeah.
yep, yep.
But there's all kinds of box sets. Right below that Beatles one is the George Harrison box with most of his albums. Actually, I think all of them. Um, and yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. I think I see the God, I can never do this when it's backwards. Yeah, the Stones mono box is where my finger is right now.
Got it. Got it.
But yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. And in fact, I just had I have a record room right next to this one, which had sh built-in shelves when we moved into the house. I just had new shelves added to the room. Um, Literally on Monday they were brought in. So I he asked me to wait a couple of days before I put records in them because of the paint. And so starting today, I can move records in, but I may just wait till I get back from Chicago. I'm not sure. But yeah, I keep collecting. I need more shelf space.
Uh-huh. You'll have to have a museum someday. Um, do,
Yeah,
do you book all the acts for your festivals, or for the festival at all the different venues? Do you do it personally, or do you have a booker?
I do it all myself. One of the things that ensures my enjoyment of doing the festival is that I book all the bands myself because I want to like them all. Most professional booking people, it's more about the bottom line. I mean, sure, some of them like really like to book cool bands that they enjoy, but a lot of it is just bring the ones who A, draw the most people, and B, well, maybe B is A, draw the most drinking people. Uh,
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's great if the bands I bring in draw a lot and the people drink, but for me, it's more important that I enjoy the bands because I go to all of my shows, and I don't want to see bands I don't like. I want to see bands I do like. So I book the bands myself, but I'd be remiss if I didn't give my wife Rena Bardfield an amazing amount of credit because she helps me. She has way more patience than I do, and she'll go online and search bands um, on Bandcamp and some of the other services for me to hear to potentially book them in a particular city. She knows my taste almost perfectly,
So
so
she's your scout.
she is my scout. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. She's my scout. Um, Only, unlike the 60s, bands didn't come in and audition. Now it's all online, of course. But, you get a good sense of who they are. That's my dad keeps calling me. He's 94. He forgets that he called me just 10 minutes ago. I'm going to turn the phone off. Sorry. Um, anyway, so yeah, she helps me a great deal. Plus, she's more savvy online than I am, and things I write, um, other things that need to go on our website. She's the one who puts them up. So, and fortunately, she goes with me to as many of the events as she can. She's an aerospace engineer, so she works a very intense job, and she can't get all the time off she would like. But she's going to come in for the first weekend of Chicago with me. Then she has to go back to work, and I'll be there for another 7 days. But she goes with me to Europe, to any city where we do the festival. She's with me.
That brings up a great question. How long do you stay in each city?
That depends on the city.
Uh-huh.
Um, we've had a low of 1 day in Phoenix when we used to do Phoenix. It was 1 day, but it was all day, and it's close enough for us to drive, so we used to do that. To IPO Liverpool is 8 days, or as I like to say at the Cavern, 8 days a week, and
Mm-hmm.
Chicago and LA are 9 days, and of course LA, it's our home base, but yeah, so I mean. We they used to be when we did fewer cities, some of them were longer. I mean, the Chicago and LA festivals used to be like 16 days, but that was too long, and we added other cities, so we shortened our time in those. But yeah, it really varies.
Tell me, how have you managed to keep IPO growing and relevant for over 25 years, in especially this changing market?
Well, we just have to you just find as many good bands as possible. Um, you find a successful city and you stick with it. You promote the festival as well as you can. But I think it's mostly about just letting people know that there's still this scene out there and that they can experience it by going to IPO. Um, you just have to keep looking. Like again, you have to do research online, find as many bands as you can, as many good ones as you can, and try to get them to play. Early on, it was different. A lot of bands, when I started IPO, a lot of bands didn't even have websites. So the only way you could hear their music would be if they contacted you
They sent you a CD,
and
for
they sent me a
example.
CD. Yes,
Yeah.
even cassettes sometimes at that point.
Yeah.
Wow. But then when then when MySpace started to happen and Facebook, and of course now you've got Bandcamp and Spotify, and bands themselves have their own websites. You saw bands become less proactive, which was a mistake on their part, I feel, because while
Because nobody's out looking for them.
no one's out looking for them, and with the technology of home recording and improving with Pro Tools and other things, there were so many more musicians coming out, recording and releasing stuff. So they were like a dot in this huge planet of music. So who was going to find them? But they figured, well, we've got our website now. We have our platform on MySpace or on Facebook. People will find us. No, they're in many ways. I think the bands are fortunate to have people like my wife and me who are willing to go out and look for them, because otherwise it's very, very difficult. Otherwise, people just don't find them. And you know what? A lot of them aren't doing themselves any favors by when you go to their website or their Facebook page. A lot of them don't list email addresses. Some of them don't even, they won't even give you their band members' names. And I understand why. I mean, there's so much spam out there, and there's so many stalkers and other people that they don't want knowing them. So I understand why they're being more circumspect, but it doesn't do them much good when it comes to getting themselves booked.
It's a crazy upside down world today, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
Um,
But you just got to keep, like I said, I just got to keep doing what I'm doing, and those who are interested, they'll come.
we just touched on it, but let's get a little bit more in depth about social media and its impact on IPO.
Well, social media is really what enabled me to branch out into so many different cities. Um, when MySpace came about, within a couple of years, they had a great search engine. At that point, let's say I wanted to look for a power pop band in Des Moines, Iowa. I could find them through MySpace's search engines. That's how specific it got. And so, especially when booking bands for Liverpool, I was able to, we were able to find bands from all over the world that way, by doing searches through their engine. So without social media, there's no, I don't think IPO would be around anymore. Maybe in LA. But as far as like other cities, probably not. It just would have become way too difficult to find the bands that I needed to find. Um, but with it, and Facebook too, Facebook has been great. And Bandcamp also has a really sophisticated search engine. Not quite like MySpace.
How do you compare Bandcamp and SoundCloud?
Well, Bandcamp's way more popular. Plus, you can buy bands' music on an artist's music on Bandcamp, which
Right.
and again, that's their bread and butter these days. Bands are, as we mentioned earlier, bands aren't being signed, so they need to be very proactive in getting their own content out there. And so, yeah, the advantage is now they own all their own content and they can do what they want with it. They're not being controlled by a label. Um, of course, the downside is they're not going to be heard by as many people, but at least they have autonomy. And through Bandcamp, they can sell their stuff. And Bandcamp, according to most musicians I know, Bandcamp is being very fair. A lot of musicians hate Spotify because they feel Spotify is a $1 billion corporation that pays them peanuts for
I
having
think it's
music.
.004 of a cent per stream. So
Something like that. Yeah.
yeah, it's crazy. It's
Yeah.
nuts.
So,
And this is my next question. What is your take on Spotify and its impact on the industry today?
well, it's had a huge impact. I mean, certainly people, millions of people are streaming. Um,
A day.
but it's only making Spotify money. It's not making the artists money. Um, and like I said, because of that, art, a lot of artists really hate it. However, the one thing that artists aren't necessarily considering are people like me, for example. And I know there aren't a lot of people just like me out there, but if I read a review of a band, um, generally the band's music, and it's intriguing to me. Generally, the first place I'm going to go is Spotify, and if I hear their music and I like it, one of two things or both are going to happen. Either I'll invite them to the festival, or I'll go out and purchase their music. Maybe I'll find it on Bandcamp, maybe at a local record shop, maybe on Amazon, whatever. So the way I use Spotify, sure, I stream, but I normally stream things I already own. But the way I mainly use Spotify is to find things to purchase. So with for uh, people like me are a big help to the artist
So
making.
so Spotify is as Google is to a search engine, Spotify is that to music.
I would say that, yeah, Spotify is certainly the most popular streaming service out there. No doubt about it.
Yeah, I hate it, but I got to have my music up there. I have no choice. Um, I heard you use the term in a interview you did about 10 years ago. It's a roll of the dice for both you booking venues and I would venture for bands coming up in 2025.
Well, I don't know the exact context in which I use that term, but yeah, I mean, it's always a roll of the dice. And staying, first of all, getting venues, you've got to contact them and sell yourself. When I contact a new venue, I have to convince them that it's something that would be worth their while to hold there. That's not always an easy thing to do. So that it's a roll of the dice in a sense that some venues see the value. Some of them feel like, all right, we could make some money here doing this, or it'll enhance our cool factor. Um, and some say, no, we can do better. We don't need that. So that's part of the dice roll. As far as bands booking, well, I mean, I'm not entirely sure of the process now as compared to how it was, even 10, 15 years ago. But it's obviously a challenge for bands to get booked. Uh, they have to. I mean, the only way they're really going to continue to get booked, they have to draw well somewhere, and then let other venues know that, yeah, I mean,
Hey, I've got a following. Yeah.
I've got a following. And, a lot of bands will lie and their managers will lie, anything to get in.
And then they have
Um,
10 people at their show and they never come back
right.
again.
And then they know, right. I mean, I think that's always been the case to some degree, but no, I mean, I feel, yeah, I mean, it's a challenge for bands to book venues. And again, the amount of venues that want to do live original music are dwindling at them every minute. So that's another challenge.
That is a crying shame, if you ask
Yes, it
me.
is.
Um, Tell me some of these success stories coming out of IPO, like Kara's Maroon 5. Uh, what acts have used your festival as a real launching point for their career?
Well, there would have been a hell of a lot more had I started the festival maybe 10 years earlier. Um, I mean, over the past 20 years, I don't know if you could I don't know that any of them have gone on to, do
Commercial
successful
success.
things, but, many bands have been signed to indie labels through playing at IPO. Other bands have gotten songs into soundtracks. Um, but these days, I mean, and for the longest time, it's been more about making connections. The one thing that IPO always will be is a platform for bands to meet each other, to get to know each other, and eventually maybe to trade shows in their different cities or even in the same city. I mean, it's amazing how I'll do a festival in a certain city, and there'll be all these bands playing from that city, and not that many of them knew each other. And because of IPO, now they do, and they have new colleagues, they have new people with whom they can book other shows. So I always hear stories about so many bands about the connections they've made through IPO. Not, again, not necessarily how many records they've sold, but how many bands they've gotten to know, how many great shows they've gone on to do. I mean, these days, that's a success story.
Do
I
you
think
have evergreen bands that keep coming back, or is it always new blood?
we have both. And there are some bands that just love doing IPO and they come back every year. And you need that. You need that to show some consistency. But we never want all the same bands back year after year. We're always trying to find some new blood. And when I say new blood, it could certainly be bands who've been around that I was just not aware of, but sometimes it can be, bands who've just formed. Again, it's a matter of searching online and finding these bands.
So
And
you are truly a doctor of music, without a doubt.
some may say,
A PhD of music.
uh,
Uh,
well, not officially. Some may say I'm the Mr. Hyde of music. I don't know about the Dr. Jekyll. No, but yeah, I mean, I like to think that I'm a music historian. And my collection reflects that. I've got stuff from the 50s through today, mostly pop music, but certainly a lot of rock and roll, R&B, 50s R&B I really like, rockabilly, um, and a lot of indie rock and singer-songwriters and things like that. So, my favorite time in music was when I was a kid listening to Top 40 radio. In New York, it was WABC 77. Um, that's what that was my foundation. And that's the stuff which is the soundtrack of my life. And so that's what I know the best. But, I like to. I mean, there's certainly people who know more than I do, and certainly know more than I do about particular bands. With my varied taste and the amount of stuff I have, there's no way I could be like, for example, as much as I love the Beach Boys, they're my favorite band. Um, I could never be the biggest expert on the Beach Boys because there's just too much other music out there I need to concentrate on. Some people, they love the Beach Boys, and that's one of their only bands they care about. So they can spend all their time learning all they can about the Beach Boys. So yeah, so I can't say that there's any band in which I'm the most expert, but I think my knowledge is fairly well rounded within the realm of pop music.
um, you grew up in the 70s listening to top 40 radio, and like you said, WABC AM and then 99X FM. Um,
Oh yeah, I did write that, didn't I?
yeah, you wrote it somewhere. I don't know where I picked it up. But then you made the transition to album-oriented radio in 75. So I'm assuming that's groups like Jethro Tull and
I mean,
or
all kinds of stuff, either ones that were happening at the time. I mean, when I first started, I was very late to the table buying records. I didn't buy my first actually prepackaged album, which were actually cassettes of the red and blue, Beatles, till 1974. I was 15, and I didn't buy my first vinyl record until 1975 when I was 16. But I made up for lost time pretty quickly. But I mean, the first things I was buying were greatest hits albums by established artists that I knew, like the Beatles and Beach Boys, Elton John, people like that. then I started, in listening to FM oriented stations like WPLJ in New York and WNEW. I started hearing all these other bands that I otherwise wouldn't have heard, and I would buy their albums. So, um, yeah, I mean, I bought some Jethro Tull, but some of my favorite bands in the '70s were, people like Fleetwood Mac and ELO and Supertramp, and then it became even more obscure groups like that when I started listening to college radio stations, and and then I started going to a lot of record stores and would sometimes you'd look at an album cover and you just knew that it would be something that you were going to like, based on the looks of the band or the names of their songs, or the instrumental makeup. And more often than not, when I took a chance on something, I ended up really liking it. Reading Billboard magazine, just whatever research material I could get my hands on or my ears on. I started to just get into it as much as I could.
But let's go back to Material Issues podcast. Um, what episode are you on?
We just finished, which one did we just finish? 201. So we'll be on 202 this coming Sunday.
Right, and you have topics like issues in the music industry. You have musicians on. How about uh, uh, industry professionals? Any
I'm sorry, what? I didn't hear.
industry professionals, like people that are shakers and movers in the industry, like people that own labels or manage bands or
We've had indie label owners on. We certainly haven't had any major label owners, but we've had people who have worked at major labels for sure, like back in the day, when the business was thriving. Haven't had any. I mean, again, the movers and shakers we've had were in that indie pop world that IPO is part of. Um, would I want some corporate executive from Sony on now? I guess I would if I could get to them. That's another difference in the music industry. With all the bands that we would have on the show, we'd ask them, "How did you get signed?" And a lot of them would say, "We walked into the A&R guy's office and said, you know, here's our tape. You're going to sign us." You could do that kind of thing back in the '70s and '80s. Now, I mean, you won't get past the concierge if you try to go into Sony or Universal. Um, so I don't even know if I could get to a professional like that. But
I
even if I could, I'm not so sure. It would be so soulless. I can't even imagine what I would hear. I'd probably want to vomit afterwards.
got it, got it. And we're talking about it now. Uh, where do you see the music scene going? Mainstream and indie. I mean, we just came out of a period where hip hop was dominating everything. And I think that's kind of running its course. And we're seeing uh, the indie scene really coming about, especially in like sync licensing and uh, the indie scene seems to be going through a renaissance right now.
I hope so. Hip hop is not my thing, but it is young people's things. I'm not here to disparage it. Um, whatever form young people are doing music in is always going to be essential to the life of the industry. Um, I do hope that melodic music starts to come back into the fore. One of the early on, when the first few years of IPO, it wasn't difficult to get young bands to play because they were still doing melodic music. All right, it didn't sound like Badfinger or the Raspberries. It sounded more like Green Day, who I consider a power pop band. I mean, not their
Hmm.
whole oeuvre, but a lot of it. And there were a lot of bands back then who were heavily influenced by Green Day, young bands. And they were, and with the Warp Tour, there were a lot of those kind of bands around. Now you don't have that anymore. You have very few young bands who are doing melodic music. Everyone knows the Lemon Twigs, for example, but there really aren't too many bands like that. And so that's part of the reason it's been a challenge for me to get younger bands to play IPO, because there just aren't that many of them who are doing the kind of music I like. And again, I don't want to compromise the what I consider to be the integrity of the festival by booking genres that don't really fit with our ethos. And also, for selfish reasons, I want to enjoy what I'm seeing, as I said.
So you don't have the blues on IPO, right?
No, not strict blues. I mean, we've had some blues pop, let's say, but not a strict blues band. No.
That's interesting genre, blues pop. Uh,
There, there's pop. There's so many subgenres of pop. There's folk pop, there's indie pop, there's singer-songwriter, there's psychedelic pop, there's garage pop, and yes, there's blues pop and there's soul pop, and we've had a little of all of that.
okay. Um, you've been so gracious with your time. We've burned through an hour already. Can you believe that? Um,
Time flies when you're having fun.
I'm having a great time. Uh, you produce a CD compilation every year, I believe, of the bands that are in IPO.
Yes, and in fact, I believe I have a copy of our last one right here. This is International Pop Overthrow Volume 25.
Oh, that's where I saw the lady with the butterfly wings.
Oh,
Okay.
I see. Oh, right.
All
Okay, yeah.
right.
That was our art director, Steve Stanley, is a genius, and he comes up with all of our designs. Um, yeah, this is the last one. As it's been through volume 5, we've done 3 disc sets featuring bands from all over the world who play International Pop Overthrow, as well as others who maybe can't make it to the festival but would have liked to, and have songs that are excellent and fit within what we're doing. So it's we our label is Omnivore Recordings, who I love. They're great people. Um, we give away copies of the CD to anyone who comes to the LA shows, and usually we have some left over, so we then give them away to people who come to some of the other shows like San Diego and Vancouver, and maybe even our East Coast shows later in the year. Omnivore takes a certain amount of copies and they sell them on their website. And I'm happy to say they've either sold out. This is our fourth. This will be our fourth year with them. They've either sold out during the first 3 years, or they've come close. So so we're very fortunate in that regard to be with them.
All right. Well, David, you've been a most interesting guest. We've covered a lot of topics. I wish I knew about you in the 90s. And
Likewise, Gary.
yeah, and you're welcome to come back on my channel anytime you feel the need. I do have over 400,000 subscribers, so
Wow.
yeah, so uh, it's been great hosting you, and I would love to talk to you again in the future.
Well, it's been great being here, Gary. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, one time I'll be back and, perhaps we'll have you on ours. We don't have 400,000 subscribers yet. I'm going to have to talk with you about how you managed to do that. But any tips would be appreciated. But yeah, I mean, someday we'll have you on as well. I can tell you've got a lot of stories to tell.
Well, thank you so much, and bon voyage on your journeys, and
Thank, thank you, Gary.
I hope IPO keeps knocking them down.
As long as my health permits me to keep doing it, I'm going to keep doing it. I mean,
All
I
right.
can't think of anything else that I want to do in my life.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, Gary. Bye bye.